Today, we are going to be talking about what I consider to be the most important battle in all of American history. This battle was so important that had it gone the other way, had the Union not won this battle, spoiler alert, it would have meant a completely different America from what we have today. It is very likely, had the South won this battle, that there would be two different countries on the land in which we now reside. There would be a United States and a Confederate States, because this pivotal turning point of the war is so important, it changes the course of the entire rest of the Civil War. I am talking about the Battle of Gettysburg. Open up your notes to a brand new page at the very top. Gettysburg. We're actually going to be talking about two battles today because they're happening simultaneously. At the same time Gettysburg is happening, there is another battle called Vicksburg going on at the same exact time. And both of their outcomes are going to be essential in changing the course of the war for the Union Army. Because you have to remember, up to this point, the South is dominating. The North is losing most of the battles they're fighting in. You have to remember, before this time, the South has won at First Bull Run, Second Bull Run, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville. True, they lost at Antietam, but just barely. And there are so many other smaller battles that we haven't talked about where the South was consistently winning battle after battle. For Lincoln, it is the summer of 1863, June and July. And he is at his most depressed. The President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, is at his low point because he has lost battle after battle. He has replaced general after general. None of them have worked out so far. McClellan, Burnsides, Hooker. Now he's got George Meade in charge of the Army of the Potomac, the Northern Army. And the army is actually on the run. They're in retreat during this time. Here's a little bit of background for you before this battle. Lee, commander of the Southern Army, what was known as the Army of Virginia, has invaded the North again. He has taken his army because he wants to get the fight out of southern states. He wants to fight in northern territory, cause devastation to northern towns, cause as much chaos and confusion as he can, and hopefully maybe even take over the U.S. capital, Washington, D.C. The South is on a victory streak here. And the Southern president, the president of the Confederate States of America, Jefferson Davis, decides this is an opportune time to try and see if maybe he can work out a peace deal that would allow the South to be its own country. At the same time these battles are happening, Jefferson Davis sends a telegram to Abraham Lincoln personally. And it is encouraging Lincoln to give up the war. He's basically telling him, you have lost battle after battle. Why does there need to be more bloodshed? Let us be our own Confederate States of America. And Lincoln, before these battles we're going to talk about today, is seriously considering it. Now, this doesn't get talked about in the history books too much because these battles tend to overshadow the other events that are happening during this time. But Gettysburg and Vicksburg, but more importantly Gettysburg, is so pivotal that had it not happened, it's possible Lincoln would have capitulated at this time and said, nope, maybe we need to back off here. So this is Gettysburg. Now, like I was saying, let's go ahead and move on here. Two battles are going on at once. There's one battle happening in Pennsylvania, which is Gettysburg, and there's another battle that's happening near the Mississippi River in a town called Vicksburg. And as you can see, I'm wearing the northern hat. It's going to stay on all day during this set of notes because this is going to be northern victory after northern victory. Vicksburg is a city that's on the Mississippi River. Now, General Grant is in charge of the Union Army in the West, and he has been for a couple of years, and he's fought some successful battles like Shiloh, which was just barely a victory for him. Vicksburg is going to be a decisive victory. Grant wants to take over the entire Mississippi River. His goal is to try and split the Confederate States in half. He would separate places like Texas from other states like Georgia because he can use the Mississippi River to separate them. He has spent 2 years winning battle after battle, taking over cities along the Mississippi. He has one major city left, Vicksburg. Now, the Confederate army housed inside of this city is a fairly strong army, so instead of launching a full-out attack, Grant decides he's going to lay siege to the city. He's going to surround them and he's going to starve them out. For 3 months, his army surrounds the city, fires continuous cannon shots. This is something where at nighttime, there would be cannons booming that would happen during the daytime for the whole purpose of just discouraging the people living inside the city, to torment them into eventually surrendering. And after 3 months of this kind of bombardment and hassle and starvation and disease, the city finally capitulates. The city surrenders, and the date is July 4th, 1863, Independence Day. And Lincoln, Grant sends a telegram to Lincoln, and Lincoln finds out that this victory has been won. He also receives a telegram on the same day telling him about an even more important victory that is won over in the East. Okay? So, again, a reminder before we talk about Gettysburg here. Up to this point, the Confederacy is winning. True, they're having a few losses over in the Mississippi area in the West, but the main battles and the ones they're really focusing on, the most important ones in the East, near the capitals, they are winning battle after battle. And this is by far my favorite battle in history. What happens on this series of 3 days, because this is a 3-day battle, is nothing short of miraculous. There are so many things that could have gone wrong and tipped the scales the other way. This is literally 2 even sides going at each other. It's the strongest the Confederacy is ever during the war, and after this point it's going to be downhill from the South. Okay? This is Gettysburg, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. Lee invades the North. I already told you about this. His goal is to eventually take over Washington, D.C., but he is going around burning places in the countryside, causing disruption and chaos. And his army, as they're marching, the Union Army keeps positioning itself between Lee's Southern Army and Washington, D.C. So every time Lee moves, the Union Army under Meade moves a little bit to try and protect the capital. And so Lee ends up actually he goes above Washington, D.C. into the state of Pennsylvania because he's trying to work his way around the Union Army. All right? Now, Lee's got kind of a problem. His men have been fighting for more than 2 years up to this point, and they haven't gotten very good supplies as far as clothing and specifically shoes. They've gotten food, they've gotten horses, they've gotten weapons and ammunition, but they have been wearing the same boots for 2 years now. And I don't know about you if you buy lots of shoes or not, but imagine having one pair of shoes only, and it's the only pair you wear all the time, and it has to last you for 2 years. What do your shoes look like at the end of those 2 years? Well, if they're anything like mine, I have to replace shoes about once a year, my main shoes that I wear, because they wear out pretty quickly. Especially being a tennis player, I wear them out. Well, half of Lee's men are completely out of shoes. They are literally walking in their socks and strapping pieces of leather underneath their feet so that they can walk and march along with the rest of the army. Now, Lee's army, the Southern Army, hears that there is a shoe factory in a tiny little town in Pennsylvania called Gettysburg. And they came up with a really quick plan of, let's go to that city, let's take over the shoe factory, commandeer some shoes, and re-equip all of our men with new shoes. What they don't know is the Union Army is dangerously close. They are nearby. Now, normally Lee would know where the Union Army is because he had a general called Jeb Stuart, who was a cavalry officer. He was in charge of people on horseback who were scouts, who would scout out ahead of Lee's army and go check for the Union positions. But because Lee is invaded into the North, Jeb Stuart starts looking for a little bit of personal glory. And instead of being the eyes and ears of Lee's army and scouting out the Union positions, Jeb Stuart decides to take his cavalry unit and go burn the countryside and go attack people and gain a name for himself. The problem is during this entire battle, because Jeb Stuart is gone, Lee does not have his scouts to figure out where the enemy positions are. For the only time in battle, Lee is going into this blind. He has no idea where the Union Army is. So on July 1st, first thing in the morning, the Confederate Army starts sending troops into Gettysburg to take some shoes. What they don't know is at the exact same time, the Union Army is on the other side of the town. An advance group of Union troops are going into town looking for supplies as well. And they literally run into each other in the middle of this town, and it starts the greatest battle in all of American history. They literally run into each other. Day one of the battle, here's what it looks like. The blue is the Union, the Northern troops. The red is going to be the Confederacy. The Union troops are in Gettysburg technically first. They arrive a couple hours before the Confederate troops do. They run into each other in this town, and there is a whole day's worth of fighting here. Basically what happens is the Union troops have to retreat. They retreat back beyond the town, so the town is right here. The Confederates who are here push them back, and the Union ends up retreating and stopping and resting on a series of hills right below the city. Now this is a problem, because up to this point in every battle that Lee, the Southern general, has fought, most of the time he has the high ground. Remember Fredericksburg, the battle where Burnside sends his troops to actually charge up and fight against Lee's troops that are at the top of a hill behind stone walls. Lee is almost always on the defensive, and he's always defending the high ground, and that's why he's able to slaughter so many Union troops. Well, at the end of day one of the Battle of Gettysburg, the Union troops are retreating, but they take the high ground. And this really ticks off Lee. Lee turns to his generals before the day is out and says, I need you to push the Union back from the high ground. Do not let them establish stone walls and defenses and fortifications. Do not give them the night to be able to defend that place properly. Push them out of there if possible, is the orders that he gives to his generals. He says, push them back further than the hills if possible. Well, the Confederate generals, when they read that order, they interpret as, hey, he's giving us an out. They look at the hills and they go, nope, not possible today, and they decide not to. Now, this is why in the last set of notes I said Stonewall Jackson is so important to the South, and him dying at Chancellorsville is such a big deal. Had he read these orders this day, he would have taken these hills. He had that kind of initiative. He would not have allowed the Union to have a defensible position. But because he is gone, and there are generals in the South who are a little more timid during this battle, A.P. Hill, Ewell, and they could argue James Longstreet, who is now the second in command under Lee. They are timid. They allow the Union to be able to fortify the hills all along here in what's like an upside down fish hook. So it would be like starting here on Culp's Hill, and the Union troops go all the way down to these little two hills called Little Round Top and Big Round Top, and they defend these positions. So at the end of day one, Union forces are pushed back, but they take the high ground, which is going to cause problems for Lee the remaining 2 days of the battle. Day two, Gettysburg. Lee decides to attack the flanks of the Union Army at the same time. So the Union Army, like I said, is in a formation of an upside down fish hook. Okay, it looks like this. You can see the hook and then it goes straight down. Lee sends an army under one of his generals called Ewell to attack this side. There's some battles there, but we're not going to really focus on the main fighting over in that area. And then he sends another set of troops under James Longstreet, his second in command, to try and attack this section of the Union's army. They're hoping that they will break through, that they will go around the Union army and be able to attack the Union army from the rear, from behind, and completely destroy the Union army. They come this close. Okay? Longstreet's army, they fight several battles. They fight through a peach orchard, and the fighting is so intense that first thing in the morning, it is a full orchard. By the afternoon, so many trees have been shot because there's been so much continuous fire from mini balls that are this big, the orchard has been completely leveled. Okay? All that's left are stumps. Later in the afternoon, they fight in a rocky area, which is right below these hills, Little Round Top and Big Round Top, called the Devil's Den. Nothing but huge boulders, and the fighting intensifies. And each time, the Confederate Army pushes forward and forward and forward, and it looks like they're going to break through until they reach this little hill right here called Little Round Top. At the top of this hill is a small group of Union soldiers from Maine. They're called the 20th Maine, and they are led by a lieutenant colonel named Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, who had been a college professor, a teacher when he was up in Maine, volunteered to fight in the war, and now his mission was to defend this hill against the Confederates, this Little Round Top. There are no other Union troops below his position. He is the end of the line, okay? And his orders are, he's been told to hold that hill no matter what the cost. Do not retreat. Do not leave this hill. Either defend it or die. Those are the orders that he's been given. There are no reinforcements. He doesn't have a ton of ammunition. They have about 60 rounds per person, which is the standard amount that they're given, but certainly not enough for the battle that lies ahead. The only advantage that Chamberlain and his men have is they hold the high ground. They're in a defensible position. He is holding the hill. His second in command is actually his brother, Tom, and the two of them work together with their troops, with their regiment, which is about 150, 200 men with them to hold this hill. The Confederates under Longstreet charge the hill. They don't do it all at once, though. What they do is they send several waves of Confederate troops. They will send a couple hundred soldiers at a time to go attack the positions and weaken the Union Army. Then they'll have the Confederates retreat down the hill, regroup with even more troops, and attack again and send wave after wave. And the hope is you get the enemy to run out of ammunition and eventually retreat. The Confederates charge this hill 5 times. 5 times Longstreet's men charge this hill, and they keep going more to the right and more to the right, trying to go around Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain's position where the 20th Maine, the Union Army, is at. They keep trying to go around them, and Chamberlain has to keep adjusting and shifting his men over on the hill to try and defend. And each time they have less and less ammunition. The first wave, they hold it back. The second wave, they hold it back with a little more difficulty. The third wave, they start to run low on ammunition. The fourth wave, they're stealing ammunition from dead bodies to be able to have enough ammunition to shoot at the folks who are charging the hill. By the fifth wave, they start to run out of ammunition. The Confederates get so close, it becomes hand-to-hand combat. They are literally attacking each other with the butts of their rifles, punching each other, shooting with what little ammunition they have left. And then a final wave comes. During this last wave of Confederates charging the hill, Chamberlain turns to his men and realizes they are completely out of ammunition. They do not have any ammo. They have nothing at all. And normally what would happen is in this part of battle, the Union Army would retreat. They would give up the hill, and that would be the end of the battle. And Chamberlain knows if he gives up this hill, it is the end of the Union Army. The Confederates will get behind the army, and they will destroy the Union Army, and it could mean the war. This is what Chamberlain looks like. Again, he had been a school teacher up in Maine. He has about 20 seconds to make a decision. The Confederates are charging up this hill, and he full well knows that up to this point in almost every battle, the Union Army retreats, and it ends up being a total disaster for them. And he makes a decision that literally saves the United States here. He turns to his men, knowing that they're out of ammunition. He turns to them and says, "Affix bayonets." He has his men take their rifles, put bayonets on the end, which look like really long knives that stick on the end of a rifle that you can use to charge and slash people open with. And he turns to his men and he says, "We are going to charge." He orders his men to charge down the hill to make it seem like they've got ammunition and take the Confederates by surprise. A bugler sounds the sound of charge. The Union Army, the 20th Maine, affixes bayonets, and they charge down the hill. The Confederate Army charging up has plenty of ammunition. All they have to do is start shooting. Chamberlain's men have none. They are charging with bayonets. And it takes the Confederates by complete surprise. The Confederates see the Union regiment charging down the hill right towards them, and they turn and run. Many of them are captured that day. They have no idea that they're being captured by guys who are holding weapons that have no ammunition whatsoever in them. Chamberlain's charge saves the Union. Little Round Top holds. They are able to defend it. And the Confederate Army has to retreat back to its positions that it held earlier that morning on July 2nd. The hill is saved. The Union is saved. Chamberlain will later get the Medal of Honor for his actions on that hill that day, as will many people within the 20th Maine Regiment. The Union is saved on day 2, so Confederate forces are stopped at Little Round Top by Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. Now, one of the ironic things about this war and this battle is that the fighting is so intense for Chamberlain's men. The Union Army, the commanders, they go up to Chamberlain that evening and they say, wow, you guys have fought really hard. You deserve a rest. We're going to place you in the one part of our lines of the battlefield that we think is the best defended, the most restful. No battles have happened there. No fighting has happened there yet. Why don't we just put you guys there so you can rest? And they put them smack dab in the middle of the Union line so that they can rest. Day 3. On day 2, Lee had attacked this part, the right flank of the Union Army, and this part, the left flank of the Union Army. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain's men have been moved to this middle part called Cemetery Ridge. It's a slightly elevated hill, but not as tall as like Little Round Top or anything, and they call it Cemetery Ridge because there's a little tiny cemetery up there. And the Union Army is behind a very thick stone wall up on that hill. Lee, since he has attacked this part of the Union and this part of the Union, figures there must be only one weak part of the Union. They must have most of their troops over here and over here. So Lee figures, how about I attack the one part of the Union Army I have not attacked left? Smack dab in the middle. He turns to a general of his who's never fought in a battle yet. He's been in the reserves as reinforcements in every battle up to this time. His name is General Pickett. And yes, if you're asking, they name a type of fence after him, okay? He orders Pickett to charge across over a mile of open ground with a fence in the middle that they're going to have to climb over, a picket fence, to charge and take over the part in the middle and split the Union Army into two, hopefully destroying them. It is a grave mistake, and probably the only major mistake General Lee makes during the entire war. He orders Longstreet to order Pickett, who works under Longstreet, to make this battle. Longstreet completely disagrees with Lee over this attack. He agrees with everything Lee had done up to this point, but he feels like this is a complete waste to attack in the middle. He feels like the army is going to be decimated. He is absolutely right. He begs Lee to reconsider. Lee refuses because Lee knows if he can win this battle, he can probably win the war. He's willing to make that sacrifice. Longstreet, when he gives the order to Pickett, Pickett in the first thing in the morning asks Longstreet, are you good for me to charge? Can I go ahead and charge my men across this open field? He's happy about it, Pickett is. He's never fought in a battle before, and he sees this as his chance. Longstreet is so upset over this, he can't even give the order. He can't even turn to Pickett and go ahead. He just nods and leaves it at that. Pickett charges with his men. Tens of thousands of men watch this battle as thousands of Pickett's men charge across this field. And when I mean they charge, they are literally walking across until they get to the end, then they step it up. It is a complete slaughter. Because the previous evening, the Union had been training their cannons and their riflemen to aim specifically for the range of where the fence is at in the middle of the field, and they held their fire until the Confederate troops made it to the fence, and then they let loose. And because they had trained all the previous day on finding the range of their weapons and where the Confederates might be if they did cross this field, they were deadly accurate. Only a few Confederate groups of men actually made it over to the Union lines. The rest of them were absolutely decimated. Out of, I believe, 16 generals, lower ranked generals, who led different regiments during this battle, I believe every single one of them was shot, and I think 13 out of 16 were killed on that battlefield that day. And then for the men itself, it was a complete slaughter. Pickett lost 75% of his men that day. It was a complete disaster. Pickett eventually has to retreat the few men that he has left. He's in the back with binoculars checking out the whole battle. And when Lee goes up to him and sees that this is a complete disaster, he turns to Pickett and says, "You need to look to your division of men, gather them together and take care of them." And Pickett turns to him and says, "General Lee, I have no division. They've all been destroyed." It is a crushing defeat for Lee's army. On day 3, Lee attacks the middle, Pickett's charge, and fails. He retreats. He pulls his men out of Gettysburg, out of Pennsylvania, and they slip down back into southern states. Lee still has a viable army here. He's still got a fairly strong army, but he will never be as strong as he was at the Battle of Gettysburg. And the North, yet again, misses a great opportunity to end this war. Meade wins this great victory. Lincoln hears about this victory. Meade writes, General Meade, the Union general, writes a telegram to Lincoln and says, "We've won this huge battle at Gettysburg." The telegram arrives on Lincoln's desk July 4th, the same exact day that Lincoln finds out about Vicksburg. So he gets 2 major victories in one single day, and he responds with an order to Meade saying, "You need to go out there, pursue Lee's army, and finish them off." Meade doesn't do it quickly enough. Lee's army slips away, crosses the Potomac River into Virginia, and it's going to prolong the war by 2 more years. Now, Lee is never going to be as victorious as he was before Gettysburg. He will win some major battles after this, but it's always going to be downhill from him. He's never going to be as strong. Meade misses a huge opportunity to destroy the Confederate army. And yet again, even though Meade has won a victory at Gettysburg, a huge victory, because he's so slow in pursuing Lee, Lincoln decides, nope, I don't want Meade in charge of my army. He doesn't fire him, he demotes him, and he promotes another general to take his place, the one who's been winning so many battles over in the West, Ulysses S. Grant. And that's going to set up the last 2 years of the war, where it's going to be General Grant in the north against General Lee in the south, and it's going to be some massive fighting between them, and we'll be talking about that soon. Now I'm going to end by saying this. Lincoln receives 2 telegrams on July 4th telling him about victories at Vicksburg and Gettysburg. It's Independence Day, 1863, and he has just gotten the best news possible, which also means he is able to take the telegram Jefferson Davis sent him saying, hey, we should make a peace treaty that acknowledges that the South gets their freedom. Lincoln tears up the telegram and realizes he can win this war. The South is not going to be as strong as they were ever again. He realizes the South is going to lose. This is the news that he needs. From this point forward, Gettysburg is the turning point of the war. From this point forward, the North will be invading the South. The South will never again invade the North. And the South will be dwindling more and more. And that is what makes Gettysburg, in my opinion, the greatest battle in all of American history. There are so many things where, if it hadn't gone right, if Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain had not defended that hill properly, on the 3rd day, he was in the middle of the fighting at Pickett's Charge. They didn't do quite the same fighting they did the day before, but they were stuck right dab in the middle because they had been placed in a position where they were told, hey, it's going to be easy fighting. Just happened to be the major fighting on the 3rd day. But if he hadn't made the decisions that he had, if the Union Army had retreated at this time, America would be much different than it is today. That's the Battle of Gettysburg.